Hi everyone, and welcome to the September vlog. Here's where I'm just going to do a bit of a highly focused dive into the foundational understanding of coercive control. My name is Tori Cook and I'm the Director of Pandora Projects. And we do a huge amount of work training practitioners in family violence responses, effective work with those who have experienced social entrapment and patterns of coercive control, as well as working effectively with those who are using family violence as well. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present. I also want to acknowledge victim survivors of family and domestic violence. Their courage and resilience continue to shape our understanding and our practice in this field. So what is coercive control? When we talk about coercive control from a practice perspective, we're talking about a pattern of behaviours that are designed to dominate, entrap, and undermine another person's autonomy. Unlike a one-off incident, coercive control is all about creating an ongoing environment of fear, dread, and compliance. That's actually really, really important in our thinking. Some of these tactics might look quite subtle on the surface, things like jealousy, constant questioning or arguments, or even trivial demands, but they're part of a broader system of power over someone else. We are not talking about a healthy relationship here where there's high conflict. That's an entirely different context. We're talking about the domination and oppression of one person by another. These behaviours over time isolate, exhaust, and silence victim survivors. And that is the purpose and function of a coercive control pattern. They're designed to induce compliance. So it's really important to note that coercive control is not just about physical violence. In fact, violence and abusive practices can be used quite sparingly. It's the threat of harm, the constant surveillance and monitoring of time, and psychological manipulation that maintains control. But there's something else that's going on here. And I'm going to refer to, Bitterman's chart of coercion. The reason that this is really important, we've only got a short amount of time, so I'm not going to go too much into depth here. But one of the things that Bitterman talks about that not many others talk about in relation to coercive control is the monopolization of perception. And the reason that that can be so destabilizing for somebody who is struggling to understand what might be going on in this relationship. The monopolization of perception is when the person using the coercive control pattern holds the narrative, and we call this a strategic narrative, holds a narrative about himself, about the victim survivor, and about the relationship. The person who is instigating this pattern, and in terms of the instigation of the pattern, there are two elements to this. There is the establishment of the pattern and the sustainment of the pattern. Both require a significant amount of energy. So what Bitterman talks about is these 8 methods of control, these 8 elements that were originally developed to explain the tactics that were used on prisoners of war. These elements include isolation, the monopolization of perception, and the distortion of reality, induced debility, this sense of not being able to be autonomous in the world, threats, occasional indulgences or occasional kindness, and the demonstration of omnipotence, this ultimate and superior power over someone else. And that also includes power over children and young people, and it could also include other people in the family. These elements also include humiliation and degradation and the enforcement of trivial demands. These elements, when combined in the unique perpetration pattern of each person using violence, actually defines the way in which the victim then has to navigate the perpetration pattern. And so when we apply this framework to family and domestic violence, it helps us to see that perpetrators use psychological pressure, and I sometimes call this relentless persistence and manipulation to keep partners entrapped. And there's also some research that talks about social entrapment that goes beyond the person using violence and the individual perpetration pattern, and into the ways in which society or our service system can maintain that entrapment through a number of different avenues. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in another vlog. We also know from Jane Monckton Smith's 8 stages of homicide risk that coercive control is a critical factor amongst other critical factors in the escalation of harm over time. So recognising these patterns early is critical to intervention. When we think about risk assessment, it is essential in our practice work. It is essential in our practice with victim survivors. It is essential in our work with men and others who are using family violence. This is not just about ticking boxes, but it's about deeply understanding and actively listening to the person who is having this as a lived experience. We must take note of the key risk indicators. The evidence around key risk indicators has great longevity. These include escalation, threats to kill, non-fatal strangulation, obsessive jealousy, or post-separation stalking. These are but a few of the indicators that signal heightened danger and risk. But we also need to listen to the victim survivor's own sense of risk, because they often are the experts of their situation and particularly aware of the perpetration pattern, the individual perpetration pattern by each person using abuse. It's also really important to remember that this is not one homogenous group of clients, that each person using violence has their own unique pattern. There are often commonalities in that pattern, but it's important to remember that there are a range of different factors that actually define that pattern as unique to each perpetrator. We must also consider the broader factors, the cultural background, the systemic barriers, marginalisation of different groupings of people, the impact of trauma. These equate to what we now understand to be intersectional risks. So a person's presentation, whether calm, anxious, or minimising, may not reflect actual safety, which is why reflective practice and collaborative multi-agency responses are so vital. I want to really delve into living under coercive control is impactful. We can certainly determine the presence of coercive control by the way in which victim survivors are navigating and managing what can be some of the most brutal kind of environments in which they live. Living under coercive control creates a constancy around dependency, debility, and dread. Victim survivors experience exhaustion, hypervigilance, and a strong sense of feeling captured and entrapped. Sometimes the absence of abuse feels like relief, but that doesn't mean that the risk is gone. It just means that the threat is simply working in the background in silence. It's why it's so important for practitioners to distinguish between what might look like a normal relationship difficulty and really understanding and assessing a pattern of control that includes obsessive, jealous, or possessive behaviours. It's in these details that risk and for some, lethality can be revealed. It is why using risk assessment tools is so important. And certainly in each state in Australia, there are a different set of tools and frameworks in each state. And for those of you that are, that are just working this through in terms of the first time and understanding coercive control, I would really strongly encourage you to have a look at your state-based framework. And a good example of that is in Western Australia, we have the WA Common Risk Assessment and Risk Management Framework. In Victoria, we have the MARAM. In Tasmania, we have the Safe at Home program. And in Queensland, there's the Coercive. As practitioners, we have a responsibility to respond to victim survivors with empathy, accountability, and collaboration. Now, this means that we must become knowledgeable about the nuances and the markers of coercive control. With that knowledge, combined with listening carefully and without judgment, recognising the signs of coercive control, even when physical abuse is not present, using a structured risk assessment tool like the CRAMPF alongside our professional judgment. Engaging and learning more about warm referrals and specialist women's networks is absolutely critical, alongside understanding what supports are available to those who are using family violence as well. We also need to engage with multi-agency safety planning. So it's not all on the victim survivor to do all of the safety planning. We can also safety plan when we are working directly with men using family violence in a range of different contexts. And if you'd like more information about safety planning, please reach out and send us an email. We would be happy to link you to the appropriate resources. We also need to keep thorough, accurate, objective records for accountability and continuity of care. Every interaction that we have is a chance to support safety and dignity and to prevent further harm. So, to summarise, coercive control is about more than just a single incident. It is about mapping patterns of behaviour, understanding the power and oppressiveness that's central to the pattern, and the broader social entrapment that can be visible in terms of the way in which the victim survivor has to also navigate not only service systems, but also informal networks like their families of origin and extended family and community. By recognising these tactics and also the vulnerabilities of social entrapment, using evidence-based tools, centering our knowledge and positioning victim survivors' voices as really critical information and expertise, we can better identify risk, enhance safety, and hold those using violence to account and pivot those people towards the kind of services and interventions that can really pivot them towards change work. I'd like to thank those of you who undertake this work and thank you for your commitment to this critical work. And thank you very much for engaging in the Pandora vlog. Until next time, take care.